Within the West, there is a fascinating perception of the Soviet Army when concerning computerization, which states that, similar to night vision systems, the USSR realized too late to modernize that digitalization was the future of warfare. Interestingly, this appears to be a new narrative that was absent throughout the Cold War. Due to the importance of norms, equations, and scientific principles to the conduct of battle, it was understood that computers fit into the Soviet military without much fuss. The 1977 production Tactical Calculations, alongside a myriad of associated texts, speak endlessly to this subject. Many documents produced in the West coming from this time go as far to critique the Soviet military for an over-reliance on computers, which is unique to say the least. There is, of course, an easy explanation for why and how computers reached this elevated status within the Soviet armed forces, and that is the ability to alleviate the primary disadvantages of centralization through automation. Automation speeds up information handling, aids parallel planning, and makes last-minute adjustments possible. It allows commanders to engage complex tasks in a fraction of the time it would require without this capability, and within a military that places initiative on a pedestal, this is impossibly useful. Automation also allowed one to increase flexibility down to the lowest of levels, and obtain a comprehensive visualization of the battlefield without delay, concepts that significantly impacted the planning process. It must be noted that this does not mean that humans were not integral to the process. This facet was retained considering the Soviets believed machines were best relegated to non-creative activities. In the words of the 1979 textbook Air Defense of the Ground Forces, automatic control systems assume minimal human participation in the troop control system. Due to its specificity, decision-making is a purely creative process. The main control function, making the final decision, remains with the human, the commander. Therefore, any troop control system cannot be fully automatic, though it must be maximally automated. For these reasons, it is by all means expected that the Soviet military would invest heavily in computerization, which led to the development of Maneuver, the first automated command and control system standardized within the Soviet ground forces.
Бьется знамя полковое, командиры впереди, солдаты в путь, в путь. А для тебя, родная, есть почта полевая, прощай, труба зовет. Солдаты в поход, пусть враги запомнят, это негрозимо говорим. Прошли с тобой полсвета, если надо, повторим. Солдаты в путь, в путь, в путь. А для тебя, родная, есть почта полевая, прощай, труба зовет. Солдаты в поход.
The concept of developing automated command and control systems stemmed from a realization that as warfare got more complex, communications and coordination would become increasingly disorganized. It was found that effective automated systems solve these complications by increasing the speed in which tactical calculations can be engaged by roughly 4 times, and reducing the human labor cost of conducting those calculations by a factor of 5. Automated systems also eased logistical processes by calculating the most efficient application of material support. These details were universally understood across the entire Soviet military system, and as a result, automated command and control complexes were studied, written about, and conceptualized as early as 1949, with the Zargovsk Electromechanical Plant 2 and NI-5, or the Moscow Research Institute of Instrument Automation, as of 1966, leading these efforts. The PVO, VVS, and rocket forces would introduce automation before unified systems designed to automate the front were in service. Yasin, Vozduk, Luk, Vector, Proton, Almaz, and RVSN, alongside many others, paved the way for Maneuver, and they may be discussed in later videos. In May of 1964, by decree of the Central Committee of the CPSU and the Council of Ministers of the USSR, development began on the possibility of automating troop control systems within the Soviet military. Immediately, as a result of this request, a research group led by Colonel Fedotov at the Frunze Military Academy was established, aimed at determining if such systems would be functional for an operational and tactical standpoint. These studies concluded that if such an endeavor was to be seriously considered, automated systems and communication complexes could not exist separately. If maneuver was to achieve complete superiority over enemy command and control, it had to be integrated alongside serious revisions to the command and control matrix of the Soviet military. Work on a system that would harmonize communications between strategic, operational, and tactical formations began at OKB 864 in Minsk. Due to the importance of Minsk Electromechanical Plant No. 864, the OKB soon became a part of the Research and Development Institute of Automatic Equipment in 1969, and in 72, all of its efforts would shift towards R&D related to maneuver. Yuri Dmitrovich Podrazov was appointed director of the Design Bureau and later chief designer of maneuver. Of course, at this time, autonomous command and control was nothing new within the Soviet military. Each branch of the armed forces developed its own automated control systems independent of one another, and as a result, they soon found themselves struggling to organize and effectively interact. A Herculean complication that the maneuver system was to solve included unifying and harmonizing these systems into an all-arms network, which would allow for effective data transmission between ground forces, frontal aviation, and rear services. On top of this, maneuver was to surpass foreign analogs, use entirely domestic technology, surpass domestic semi-automatic communication systems, and maintain the ability to operate in extreme temperatures, between negative 50 degrees Celsius and positive 50 degrees Celsius. Throughout the course of fulfilling these requirements, technology, which was in many regards new to the Soviet Union, had to be developed to facilitate the success of maneuver. These included modern computer graphics, digital coordinate acquisition systems, keyboards, display systems, modern data transmission equipment, codogram dialing consoles, and software for complex database management. These various subsystems would then be unified in maneuver and installed in divisions as well as regiments, offering 26 vehicles to commanders and their staff. At the front and army level, 100 such vehicles were present. Within regiments, maneuver was mounted on MTLBU, while at the operational level, Ural 375 saw use as the chassis of choice for the complex. Nikolai Ilyasovich Azamatov was exceedingly influential when it came to the choice to adopt maneuver, as he made it clear the complex would be an open system that would allow for the aforementioned issues of interaction to be solved in expedient fashion. Due to the complexity of maneuver, the language in which it operated, ILS, had to be developed from scratch, which was built from the ground up by NISA. This meant that all systems developed using this language would in turn be compatible with maneuver, making it a truly open system. Throughout the 70s and 80s, he would focus on distributing computers that made it possible to organize data alongside its storage at separate databases. This approach made maneuver a highly modular platform that would suit a wide range of needs. Even with severe limitations on storage capacity and computer performance experienced at this time, maneuver was still capable of processing information with extreme efficiency. Furthermore, despite the computing equipment that made up maneuver being inferior in many regards when compared to foreign analogs, the system was considered more reliable, survivable, and capable than anything else in service at the time. Furthermore, the time it took to deliver relatively large volumes of error-free data was quite impressive for the era in which the system was conceptualized and began to enter service. Throughout the course of developing maneuver, new requirements would arise as a result of experience with the system. These included the transmission of operational tactical information, real-time data transmission, and remote intelligence input. Penza Research and Development Institute of Electrical Engineering was chosen to solve the first requirement, and as a result would develop the T-244 Basalt in 1972, as well as the T-235 Redut in 1985. These complexes allowed for extensive data exchange networks to be constructed, which were unlike anything seen in the world at the time of their introduction. The second requirement was solved by Krasnaya Zarya in Leningrad with assistance from the Moscow Research Institute of Automatic Instruments. Here, an entire generation of equipment would be created, such as C-23 in 1976, AI-011 in 1976, and C-23M in 1982, as well as the Irtish in 1985. Remote input systems were handled by NISA, where equipment to automate command and control within the chemical troops were developed. Due to the design of Maneuver's telecode exchange system and data transmission equipment, the complex could operate and reliably transmit under extreme active and passive interference, ionizing radiation, and electronic attacks. Notably, in 1986, an exercise was held in which a tank division was subjected to a highly concentrated electronic attack. Despite this, their command and control were not shunted, and Maneuver remained operational. The network was operated from a central command and control center, which extended downwards to tactical subunits. This made it possible to completely restructure the architecture of a formation's very high-frequency communication network to meet mission requirements. Because almost every branch of the armed forces was to operate Maneuver, it became troublesome to keep up with the requirements proposed by each customer. There were issues with familiarization, rejecting protocols that functioned within adjacent organizations, and design issues that had to be remedied. This meant that while extremely impressive, Maneuver was also terribly expensive. Over 500 organizations and enterprises throughout the USSR and Warsaw Pact participated in the development of Maneuver. Most notably the Military Academy of the General Staff of the USSR Armed Forces, the Military Academy of Armored Forces, the Franz Military Academy, the Military Academy of Communications, Chemical Defense, Artillery, and the Engineering Academy. Finally, in 1981, Colonel General Garyev was selected to conduct state trials that would determine if Maneuver was adopted, after which a 3-day exercise was conducted to stress test the system on a real motorized rifle division. As a result, in 1982, the Maneuver system was finally adopted by decree of the CPSU Central Committee and the USSR Council of Ministers. NISA was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor for their efforts. To determine if it was possible to construct an automated troop control system with existing technology, a mock-up was devised. It consisted of an electronic keyboard, a display that could edit and read messages transmitted digitally at a speed of 1,200 bps, and an R401 radio with a frequency of 16 kHz. The system would receive and transmit through 3 digital channels simultaneously, while relaying unique data between each of them. Generally speaking, this mock-up proved satisfactory. Of course, it was still missing a computer, but issues such as extreme interference when the vehicle was on the move were solved, which led to the study succeeding in its aims. In the early 1970s, the first prototypes of the divisional and regimental systems were tested at Borisov. Here, many issues arose that threatened the project, most notably the ability for Maneuver to connect with existing communication technologies. In many regards, it was impossible to make this a reality, as none of these systems interfaced with Basalt. This issue was only inflated by the fact that the team working on Maneuver was barred from accessing emerging communication technology, and were told that they could only employ what was available on site. This significantly muddled development, since all of the communication systems were to be located within the transportation vector that housed the automated control system. And so employing obsolete technology could lead to an unsatisfactory product that would fail to mate with modern communication equipment. The divisional variant would offer 3 channel sets, while the regimental model would offer only 1. These were combined into networks of up to 10 systems. When transmitting a message, the device switches to standby mode. If the message is not received, a new channel is immediately sent the same codegram. After 6 attempts to transmit, the message will be delivered to the transmitting party, closing the loop. Of course, there were some issues with the implementation of this network. Firstly, such a process could not function if a communication plan had yet to be drawn up, as all available frequencies, call signs, and assorted mechanisms needed to exist within Maneuver's database. To engage this task, the commander of the division's communications was chosen. However, this initially proved problematic, as the signal troops at this time were against automation and were not organized to effectively integrate maneuver. As a result, the complex was neglected until modernization through the structure of divisional command and control could be put into place. After many arguments and heated debates, KSHM MP21 would be devised, which employed a 16-meter very high-frequency antenna mast. The complex, and by that I mean automation and communication equipment, was powered by an 8-kilowatt diesel generator affixed to the MTLVU. This vehicle was chosen as maneuver's housing due to its spacious interior, which could accommodate 3 officers and 2 radio operators, as well as the placement of the engine that allowed for the first models to allocate much of the system's equipment in the center compartment. This was separated from the commander's compartment by a partition. In the aft compartment, 3 officers were located. This would become problematic as initial trials showed that the vehicle tossed them around during movement, making their work nigh impossible to effectively engage. This is because of MTLVU's center of gravity, which left the central compartment with all of its sensitive equipment effectively untouched by high-speed cross-country movement. As a result, the standard MTLV was tested to reduce the uneven ride quality, but this would only increase interference while the system was in motion. This led to MTLVU securing its position as the only suitable system to transport maneuver at the divisional level. Of course, changes would be made that would solve these issues. Early models would have to feature the semi-transistorized technology available at the time, such as 2 R111 radio stations, R123MT and R130M, R105, T219M, and the internal communication and switching equipment. Throughout the course of developing KSHM, equipment placement changed several times. Models at the lower level would be built upon the already established BMP-1 KSH, which made the integration process significantly easier in some regards, considering the system already had communication equipment and an antenna mast installed, yet there were indeed complications that resulted in the platform having to be redesigned to support maneuver, which was a costly endeavor. Finally, after a considerable volume of preliminary trials, it was found that the radio stations installed at this time did not exhibit high enough performance to warrant their use in maneuver. Of course, this was understood 10 years prior to this final conclusion, but now it was fact rather than opinion. The primary issues experienced at this time were poor range, limited digital signal transmission capabilities, insufficient compatibility, and issues with the intercom system being connected to the automatic control system. So a new interface had to be devised. The first iteration of Basalt was also rather volatile. Codograms would disappear without a trace, which was caused by 2 transmitters failing to receive the signal that the network was occupied and instead relaying simultaneously. With some 50 people in any one network, this became problematic. At the time, to operate the system, one typed up a message and pressed a button which automatically transmitted the codogram from the computer system to Basalt, after which the user wasn't exactly aware if the message had been successfully delivered. While there was an indicator on Basalt itself, the radio operator couldn't see this from his station unless he swung 180 degrees around. This was unfortunate as Basalt displayed quite a lot of information, such as the number of errors it corrected, the channel quality, and how many messages had been rejected or failed to send. Issues arose when operators failed to check Basalt and instead called the recipient directly and asked over voice if they had gotten the codogram. This could cause disruptions in the network. Maneuver became increasingly complicated when the Beta 3M computer system was installed, which was housed in a separate vehicle. Computing within Maneuver was initially handled by Rhythm 10, which was almost immediately replaced by Beta 3M. This computer employed the A40, which was a high-performance 32-bit system, an external 640 kilobyte storage device, a 600 kilobyte magnetic storage device known as ZUML75. The main purpose of Beta 3M was to automatically prepare, analyze, and communicate plans for the conduct of offensive operations. In 1985, 16 megabyte RAM would see introduction, which significantly expanded the range of tasks the computer system could solve. A40 comes from the A30, which was developed for mobile air defense systems, missile warning, air traffic control, and a number of other uses. With the emergence of monolithic microcircuits within the USSR, A40 was developed to integrate this technology. As a result, it would receive additional I-O channels and external memory. A40 would later be modernized into the A50. A30, A40, and A50 would all be compatible in regards to their software. A40's CPU is similar to that of ES-1060. Both can execute a wide array of tasks simultaneously. Data exchange takes place through an I-O channel integrated with a processor. A40 has 32 kilobyte ferrite core RAM and 128 kilobyte ferrite core ROM. Has a I-O channel throughput of 650 kbps in burst mode, 65 kbps in byte multi-complex mode, can achieve 500,000 operations per second in format RX, 140 operations per second with Gibson 3E mixture, has a weight of 180 kilograms and consumes 800 watts of power. Reducing interference between equipment operating exposed cables had to be solved, as this was limiting the range of the complex, and so in the 1970s this issue was remedied by rewiring the entire interface. One of the largest issues at this time, which was not seriously looked into until the 1980s, was the fact the division's chief of communications struggled to interact with the system due to the organization of maneuver, as he and his officers were left without automated workstations. Therefore, information could not be relayed reliably to his subordinates through the telecode network. This was especially problematic as switching the system from telecode to voice communication disrupted the command and control process. The only way that the division's chief of communications could relay information was through officers with automated workstations, which meant those individuals had to dedicate time away from their tasks to deliver these commands. The R134M radio station was relegated to solving this complication, but as an unsatisfactory side effect, it deprived the network of secrecy. At this time, it was effectively impossible to intercept messages transmitted through telecode networks. On top of this, it was exceedingly easy to create false telecode networks, complicating the process for the enemy. As a result, this error compromised what was otherwise a near impenetrable system. Luckily, it would be solved. Eventually, a new layout for the KSHM was devised, which placed the radio operators in the rear compartment and the officers in the center, after issues were solved with the crew being thrown around in transit, and while trying to operate on the move. In the early 1970s, after painstaking analysis of the radio stations within KSHM, an algorithm was designed to determine compatible frequencies, which effectively eliminated contact interference. During state tests, a column operating maneuver was to conduct a 50-kilometer march that would cross the Minsk-Moscow highway and pass through several settlements. Issues were encountered when operators unfamiliar with the system failed to raise the antenna mast, botching the exercise. As a result, the column had to drive back in the dark. Here, the system displayed extreme efficiency. While driving at high speeds, Basalt transferred information to the beta computer system, which solved equations and sent the results to the recipients. Everything went according to plan, and not a single voice transmission was made. Information was automatically plotted on the map, and the unit returned to base successfully, completing the trial. Despite the fact the road was uneven and difficult to traverse, this did not inhibit the functionality of maneuver. To ease the operation of complex systems while on the move, the keys were enlarged, and employed military abbreviations as opposed to letters, which significantly increased the speed of typing and sending messages. Following these trials, the possibility of communicating at a speed of 1,200 bps from KSHM via a remote control radio station located 100 kilometers away was tested. This failed, and so another test was conducted with R137 from 70 kilometers. This time it worked, yet the signal was not of sufficient quality to say that the test had been successful. Yet, after transmitting with a reversed polarity, the system operated as it should, and the messages were received. Despite this, for whatever reason, the test was considered a failure. Even with the improvements to the MTLVU and efforts that sought to allow the system to accommodate maneuver, it proved unsuitable for the task. And as a result, work would once again begin on finding a new transportation vector to house the complex. This would eventually culminate in a project that began work at Volgograd, being reviewed in 1979 by members of Maneuver's team. This prototype, designated Object 940, would feature a hydropneumatic suspension that would solve almost all of the issues encountered while working with the MTLVU. The engine was also far quieter, meaning it did not interfere with the communication equipment. This was an issue that persisted on MTLVU, despite a great deal of resources being allocated to resolving it. The integration of an attached dozer blade made it possible for Object 940 to entrench itself, which was a useful feature that would assist in the rapid erection of COPs. The chassis was also more spacious, was significantly lighter, could be airdropped, had increased protection from small arms fire, and had partitions between compartments that finally featured doors, which eliminated some auditory interference between the three sections. Integrating maneuver with Object 940 was complicated by the fact it was demanded only new communication systems, many of which were still undergoing R&D, were to be used. These included fully transistorized devices such as the R171M, R173M, R178, R134M, T219, Argon-1M computer, a new display plus graphics system, and T240S. Adopting these systems into the already existing complex was difficult and resulted in the automated control system requiring a redesign. The complex was also to include a new switchboard. The integration of night observation devices for the driver improved the cohesion of the crew when operating in limited light conditions. After successful experimentation, those operating the system stated it was impossible to compare Object 940 to MTLBU-based maneuver complexes. Unfortunately, for reasons few can comprehend, MTLBU was chosen over Object 940. Maneuver's final tests were conducted at Zapad 81, after which it was concluded that developing a system based on maneuver for Warsaw pact customers could begin, and that integrating automated control systems so that the deputy and his officers could operate within the telecode network was of extreme importance.
Стоим мы на посту, повзводно и поротно, бессмертны, как огонь, спокойны, как гранит. Мы армия страны, мы армия народа, великий подвиг наш история хранит. Не зря в судьбе аллеи знания, не зря на нас надеется страна. Священные слова, Москва за нами, мы помним со времен Бородина. Священные слова, Москва за нами, мы помним со времен Бородина. За перелесками, за полустанками, за чертежами, за станками, за баранками еще не знали мы, еще не ведали, что мы в душе с тобой давно уж моряки. А служба службою везде, и на земле, и на воде, и друга верного рука с тобой в любой беде. А если очень повезет, тебя дорога приведет на славный Черноморский